I don't know. If I have to take the word of the Israelis or Hamas, I'll be honest, I'm going to lean with the Israelis far quicker than I'm going to lean with Hamas. And I do know that.
Welcome back, everyone. And buckle up, because what you're about to hear will leave you shaking your head. The never-ending saga of Ambassador Mike Huckabee continues. For those who don't know, he's not just the U.S. ambassador, he's practically Israel's defense attorney on the world stage. Every move, every strike, every controversial action, he rushes to defend it. Not once does he stop to condemn, not once does he pause to question. It's blind loyalty dressed up as diplomacy. And the irony. He calls this balance, Martin, but in reality it's nothing more than excuse-making, shielding one side from any accountability. Before we dive into the full story, comment where you're watching from. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now let's roll the tape and expose exactly what Huckabee's been saying.
I've said this many times, Piers, if Israel is trying to commit genocide, they're really honestly bad at it. Because they could have done genocide on October the 8th. We know they have the military capacity, but they haven't. They have tried to spare civilian life, tried to contain the collateral damage, but they don't get any credit for that, appreciation for that. Instead, they get condemned by the very people that ought to be their allies and that ought to understand that if the same thing happened, whether it was in France or Great Britain or Canada or the Netherlands, I assure you that the people of those nations would not say, gee, we just don't like the way that you're fighting those who did this to us. Israel doesn't just go in and bomb the ever-loving bejesus out of Gaza. They send messages, leaflets, they give warnings to people, they tell them where they're going to hit, and they urge them, get out of this area. There's a rocket launcher there, there's a base there, there's a military structure there, and they're very specific, and they tell people to get out. Hamas takes its civilians and herds them to those very places that had been announced by the Israelis as a target. To be fair, I love my country, I serve my country, but my country, the United States, we don't tell adversaries where we're going to hit in advance of it. And Israel has done that consistently for as long as I can remember, back in the previous Gaza war in 2012, 2014. And quite frankly, nobody ever says that's kind of a spectacular thing to do. Yes, there's a lot of people that shouldn't have been killed or injured, and they are. It is a tragedy. But the tragedy started on October the 7th. And I think this is one of those areas where apparently you and I do agree. It started with the raping of women in front of their children, the beheading and burning in ovens of babies, lighting elderly people on fire as they sat in their wheelchairs as their families were forced to watch it. And all of this, we know it happened despite what some people deny. We know it happened because the Hamas terrorists, the savages, they videotaped it themselves.
And then Huckabee really takes us into fantasy land. He claims, with a straight face, that Hamas somehow made $500 million selling stolen humanitarian aid. $500 million. Where exactly did he get that number from? Hamas tax returns? A PowerPoint from thin air? It's absurd. He throws out figures that sound dramatic but have zero evidence behind them. Meanwhile, the facts we can verify tell a very different story. According to a recent report from The Guardian, only 1.5% of Gaza's farmland remains. Let that sink in. Gaza once had rich, abundant farmland, fields that fed families and sustained communities, and now virtually gone, flattened, targeted. Even the crops aren't spared. So when Huckabee talks about theft, he's right. But it's not Hamas doing the stealing. It's Israel systematically stripping the land, seizing territory, and leaving nothing behind. Yet we're still waiting for a single shred of credible proof that Hamas has stolen any aid, still waiting for any evidence at all. What Huckabee is selling isn't truth. It's a distraction, smoke and mirrors to cover up what's really happening on the ground.
An enormous amount of humanitarian aid and food in prior to the blockade that would have been more than enough to feed them throughout the blockade. But the problem was that Hamas was stealing the food. One of the reasons that Israel stopped the just almost unlimited supply of food going in was because Hamas was profiting off of it They made $500 million last year selling it. And one of the things that was so outrageous was because they would steal the food. By the UN's own numbers, about 88 to 89% of the food going in has been stolen or looted. So that means that the people weren't getting the food. And I'll tell you who else wasn't getting the food. The hostages. I know you saw the video of the hostages a week ago when Hamas posted this hideous, disgusting video of hostages being tortured, being starved, and being forced to dig their own graves. They're not getting any of that food. So the problem has come that all the pressure from European countries and even Canada.
And then Huckabee really takes us into fantasy land. He claims, with a straight face, that Hamas somehow made $500 million selling stolen humanitarian aid. $500 million. Where exactly did he get that number from? Hamas tax returns? A PowerPoint from thin air? It's absurd. He throws out figures that sound dramatic but have zero evidence behind them. Meanwhile, the facts we can verify tell a very different story. According to a recent report from The Guardian, only 1.5% of Gaza's farmland remains. Let that sink in. Gaza once had rich, abundant farmland, fields that fed families and sustained communities, and now virtually gone, flattened, targeted. Even the crops aren't spared. So when Huckabee talks about theft, he's right. But it's not Hamas doing the stealing. It's Israel systematically stripping the land, seizing territory, and leaving nothing behind. Yet we're still waiting for a single shred of credible proof that Hamas has stolen any aid, still waiting for any evidence at all. What Huckabee is selling isn't truth. It's a distraction, smoke and mirrors to cover up what's really happening on the ground.
And the reason this matters so much is that if the IDF has deliberately targeted a group of journalists in Gaza City, and it turns out that that man, al-Sharif, was not a Hamas terrorist, then that would constitute a war crime.
I also would point, there are photos where this alleged journalist is hugging the head of Hamas and smiling and yucking it up for the cameras. There is evidence that indicates that he was an asset for Hamas. And if it's proven that he isn't, then that's a different calculation. But right now, the evidence points to the fact that he was. And why would someone pose as a journalist? I mean, I know why they would do it, but I think that's incredibly despicable if somebody is pretending to be just reporting the news, but is actually being a participant in the outcome.
But there is no actual hard evidence that he was a Hamas terrorist. The only evidence appears to be old pictures of him with Hamas leaders, of which there would be many people in Gaza who would do pictures of that nature with the governing body. This is prior to October the 7th. I think judging people as terrorists prior to October the 7th, when this was a government that was being financially supported by Israel, amongst others, to the tune of billions of dollars, is pretty disingenuous. And the reason this has inflamed tension so much, both in Gaza and around the world, is twofold, Ambassador. One is that, as you know, foreign journalists have been banned from entering Gaza for the last 2 years, since October the 7th, which is in direct contravention of how almost every war zone ever in modern times has operated in relation to foreign journalists being allowed to do their jobs. So it's been impossible to verify a lot of these claims that the IDF makes about incidents like this. But secondly, if it turns out this guy was not actually a Hamas terrorist, then what has happened here is that a group of journalists have been targeted deliberately in a war crime. And this is not the first group of journalists in Gaza who've been killed. Over 200 journalists now, Palestinian journalists, have been killed in Gaza since the start of the war, which is more than the number of journalists killed in pretty much every other post-Second World War war put together. At what point are you concerned about what appears to be an ongoing attack on press freedom? And would you like to see Western journalists, international journalists, allowed in to freely operate, not embedded with the IDF, but freely operate and do their jobs so that we can actually get to the bottom of so many of the claims that Israel's been making?
Well, I want to again say, I don't have the evidence that you seem to think you have regarding this guy's innocence. I don't know. If I have to take the word of the Israelis or Hamas, I'll be honest, I'm going to lean with the Israelis far quicker than I'm going to lean with Hamas. And I do know that I don't think that they would just go target a journalist just so they could take him out because they didn't like what he's saying. I think they're a much better country than that. They have a much better moral code than that. and I'm going to give him credit for that.
And then we get to Anas al-Sharif, a man whose courage puts Huckabee to shame. While Huckabee sits comfortably spinning talking points, Anas was on the ground in Gaza, camera in hand, documenting the devastation day after day. He risked everything to show the world the reality Israel wants hidden. There is zero credible evidence to smear his name, zero proof to suggest anything negative about him. And yet, despite the danger, he kept filming. Even after his assassination, his camera continued to record, capturing the very same indiscriminate strikes Huckabee insists on defending. That's the difference here. One man fought to expose the truth, the other man hides behind a podium, excusing the inexcusable. History won't remember Huckabee as a diplomat. It will remember him as an apologist, a man who chose loyalty to power over loyalty to justice, defending slaughter instead of condemning it. And Anas al-Sharif? He will be remembered as a journalist, a witness, and a voice for the voiceless. Until next time, this has been The Whip Line. Thanks for tuning in.